Everything you've decided their silence means is wrong. Every story you've built in your head about why they haven't reached out, every version where it means they don't care, they've moved on, they never felt what you felt, all of it, wrong. And I need about 20 minutes of your attention to show you what it actually means. Because the truth is going to sit very differently in your chest than the story you've been carrying. Hi, my loves. It's Elena. Welcome back to Elena Tarot. Sit down for this one and take a breath, a real one, not the shallow, anxious one you've been taking every time you check your phone. Let me tell you something embarrassing about myself, because it's the reason I understand this so well. Years ago, a friend of mine went completely silent on me, weeks with nothing. And I did what we all do. I built a story. She's angry with me. I said something wrong. She's decided I'm not worth the effort. I went over every conversation we'd had, hunting for my crime. I got hurt, then defensive, then cold. By week 5, I had constructed an entire narrative in which I was the wronged party and she was careless and cruel, and I had almost fully written her out of my life in my own head. And then I found out she'd been in a hospital. Her mother had gotten very sick, very suddenly. She hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks, not me, not her closest friends, not her own family beyond the essentials. Her silence had nothing to do with me. It had never had anything to do with me. It was the sound of a person completely underwater, using every ounce of energy she had just to keep her head above the surface. And I had spent 5 weeks assigning that silence a meaning it never had, and feeling wounded by a message that was never sent. I have never forgotten how it felt to realize I'd been having an entire argument with someone who wasn't even in the room. And that, loves, is exactly what's happening in this no contact right now. You've been assigning a meaning to this silence. You've decided what it says about you, about them, about what you meant to each other. And what came through the cards today is that you have it wrong, not a little wrong. Fundamentally, completely, in the wrong room wrong. The real reason for their silence is not what you think. And I need to tell you what it actually is. Let me shuffle. The story you've been telling yourself, first card down, and it's not about them at all, it's about you and the narrative you've built. The card is the 7 of Swords, and here I'm reading it in a very particular way. The 7 of Swords is the card of a story that isn't quite true, of a version of events assembled from partial evidence, of self-deception even, and here's what's been happening in your mind. You have taken an absence, a lack of information, which is all silence actually is, and you have filled it with a story. And because you're human and hurting, the story you filled it with was the worst one available. They don't care. They've forgotten me. I meant less than I thought. If they wanted to, they would. You've constructed a whole narrative, and then, crucially, you've forgotten that you constructed it. You've started treating your story as fact. But here's the thing about silence, and I want you to really hear it. Silence contains no information. None. It is a blank page. It says absolutely nothing about the person's feelings, their heart, their reasons. It only tells you that no message arrived. And a blank page is not a message. You have been reading a page with nothing written on it and swearing you can see the words. Let me make this practical, because it's one of the most useful psychological truths there is. Think about how differently you interpret a friend's unanswered text depending on your mood. On a good day, they're just busy. On a bad day, they're ignoring you and you're annoying. Same silence. 2 completely opposite meanings, which proves the meaning was never in the silence, it was always in you. And when someone we care about goes quiet during a painful time, we don't reach for the neutral explanation. We reach for the one that confirms our deepest fear. So the story you've been telling yourself, isn't the truth. It's a mirror. You've been reading your own insecurity back to yourself and mistaking it for their message. Comment, "I built a story," if you can admit you filled their silence with a narrative you have no actual evidence for. Because that admission is the first step toward the truth. And I want to name why we do this, because understanding the mechanism helps you stop it. The human mind cannot tolerate ambiguity. It genuinely can't. Uncertainty registers in us almost like physical pain, and so the mind will do anything to resolve it, including inventing a painful certainty. Because a painful certainty is more bearable than an open question. That's the whole reason you built the story. Not because you're insecure or dramatic, but because "they don't care about me" is a finished thought. And "I don't know why they're quiet" is an unfinished one, and the mind will always choose a finished, awful answer over an unfinished, unknowable one. So you gave yourself an answer. You chose the pain of a verdict over the discomfort of not knowing. But here's what that costs you. Once you have a story, you stop collecting evidence, you start defending it. Every small thing gets reinterpreted to fit. They post something online, "See, they're fine without me." They don't post, "See, they're too busy with someone else to even post." Whatever happens, the story eats it and grows stronger. Because that's what stories do when we've decided they're true. So the very first thing this reading has to do, before I can tell you anything about them, is get you to loosen your grip on the story. Just enough to consider that it might be a story. Can you do that for me? Just for the next few cards. Hold your certainty a little more loosely, and let me show you what the cards actually say. Next card, what the silence actually is okay. Second card, and now we get to the real reason. The card is the Four of Swords, and loves this changes everything, so stay with me. The Four of Swords is the card of retreat, of someone lying down, completely still, recovering. It's the card of a person who has withdrawn from the world, not because they're rejecting anyone, but because they have nothing left. It is rest, exhaustion, convalescence. It is the sound of someone who is depleted, hiding away in the dark, waiting to be able to function again. That's their silence. That's what it actually is. This person is not silent because they've moved on. They're not silent because they're punishing you, or because they've decided you don't matter, or because they're out there living some carefree life without a thought of you. They're silent because they are underwater. Something in their life, internal or external, and it may have nothing to do with you at all, has depleted them to the point where reaching out is beyond their current capacity. The Four of Swords is a person in a state of shutdown. And a person in shutdown doesn't send messages. Not because they don't care about the people they're not messaging. Because they can't. And I need you to sit with how completely this reframes things. You've been experiencing their silence as an action, as something they're doing to you. But the Four of Swords says it's not an action at all. It's a condition. It's not they are choosing not to contact you. It's they are not currently capable of contacting anyone. The difference between those two is the difference between rejection and collapse. And you've been grieving a rejection that isn't happening. Test it yourself if you want the evidence. Have you looked at whether they've gone quiet everywhere? Not just with you, with everyone. Because that's the tell. A person who is rejecting you specifically stays perfectly active in the rest of their life. They're just absent from yours. But a person in a Four of Swords shutdown goes dim across the board. Their whole world gets quieter. If you look honestly and find that they've withdrawn from far more than just you, that the light has gone out of their entire life. Not only the part you were in, then you have your answer, and it isn't the answer you've been torturing yourself with. Here's the practical picture. and I want you to really let it land. Think about the last time you were truly overwhelmed, genuinely, deeply overwhelmed, depressed, or burned out, or in crisis. Remember how the smallest tasks became impossible? How answering a simple text felt like it required lifting a car? How you had people in your life you loved, who you wanted to talk to, and yet you couldn't make yourself pick up the phone, and the longer you left it, the harder it got? You weren't rejecting those people. You were drowning. And I'd bet almost anything that at least one of them was, at that very moment, sitting somewhere building a story about how you didn't care about them anymore. That's this. That's exactly this. You are the person on the other side of a drowning, reading their inability as indifference. And I want to be honest about something, because I never want to hand you a comfortable half-truth. The Four of Swords doesn't always mean a dramatic crisis. Sometimes it's not a hospital, not a catastrophe. Sometimes it's something quieter and less legible from the outside, a depression they'd never call depression. An exhaustion that has no name. A slow collapse of their own capacity that they themselves don't fully understand. It might be a job that's eating them alive, a family thing they can't talk about, a shame spiral, a period where they simply don't like who they are right now and can't bear for you to see them like this. That last one is very common, actually, and very tender. Some people go silent precisely because they can't stand for the person they care about to witness them at their lowest. The silence isn't distance. It's hiding. It's a person who doesn't want you to see them in the state they're in. Which means, painfully, that the silence may actually be proportional to how much they care what you think of them. Nobody hides from a stranger. You only hide from the people whose good opinion you can't stand to lose. So if this person has vanished rather than let you see them struggling, that's not the behavior of someone who's indifferent to you. That's the behavior of someone who cares so much about how they appear in your eyes that they'd rather disappear than be seen diminished. Turn that over in your mind. It changes the whole picture. Next card. Why they can't reach out even though they want to, okay? Third card. And this explains the mechanism because you might reasonably ask if they're not rejecting me and they miss me. Why don't they just send one message? The card is the Eight of Swords, and the answer is genuinely painful. The Eight of Swords is the card of a person who is trapped, bound, blindfolded, unable to move, even though, if you look at the imagery closely, the bindings are loose and the way out is right there. It's a trap made almost entirely of the mind. And here's the specific trap this person is in. The longer the silence goes on, the more impossible it feels to break. This is so important, so let me spell it out. On day 3 of the silence, reaching out would have been easy. Just a message. No big deal. But on day 30, now the silence has weight. Now any message they send has to account for the silence. Now they'd have to explain themselves, apologize for the gap, face whatever damage the absence has done, and the longer they wait, the bigger that explanation becomes, and the more daunting the reach out feels, so they wait a little longer, which makes it worse, which makes them wait longer. It's a spiral. It's a trap that tightens the more time passes. So there's a very real possibility that this person desperately wants to contact you, has drafted messages, has picked up the phone, and has been stopped every single time by the sheer weight of what the silence has become. They're not enjoying the silence. They're stuck in it. Trapped in an Eight of Swords of their own making, watching the distance grow, feeling worse every day, and finding it harder to break with every hour that passes. Here's the practical version, and you've done this yourself, I promise. Think about a message you owed someone, a reply to an important email, a call to a relative, a thank you note. You meant to do it. Days passed. And then it got awkward, because now you were late, and now you'd have to acknowledge being late. And so you put it off again. And then more time passed. And eventually the thing you genuinely wanted to do became something you couldn't make yourself do, purely because of how long you'd already left it. The delay created its own obstacle. And here's the cruelest part from the outside: your silence looked like you didn't care. From the inside, it was pure paralysis and mounting dread. That's them. That's exactly the box they're in. Comment the longer it gets if you understand this trap from the inside, if you've ever been unable to reach out precisely because too much time had passed. Because that's what's happening to them right now. And there's a second layer to this trap that I want to name, because it's the part that keeps people stuck the longest. It's not just that the silence has weight, it's that they've started imagining your reaction. In their head, they've run the scenario 100 times, they finally message you, and you're cold. Or angry. Or you don't respond at all. Or worse, you respond politely, distantly, like they're a stranger now. And each of those imagined outcomes is so painful that they retreat before they've even typed a word. So they're not just battling the weight of the silence, they're battling an entire imaginary version of you who has already rejected them. And here's the terrible symmetry of it: you've been doing the exact same thing. You've built an imaginary version of them who doesn't care. They've built an imaginary version of you who has moved on and would be cold if they reached. Two people, both full of feeling, both frozen by a fictional character they invented of the other. That's what a long silence actually is, most of the time. Not one person rejecting another. Two people, each protecting themselves from a rejection that exists only in their own head. Nobody is in the room. Everyone is arguing with a ghost. Next card. What they actually feel about you, okay? Fourth card. And this is the one that's going to make some of you cry, so brace properly. Because I've told you what the silence isn't. This card tells you what's underneath it. The card is the Ace of Cups. The Ace of Cups is pure, overflowing, unguarded feeling. It's the cup so full it spills over. It's the raw, undefended source of love before any of the fear and complication get layered on top. And its presence here, underneath all that shutdown, all that paralysis, all that silence, is heaven telling you the truth that the silence has been hiding from you. They still feel everything. The feeling didn't go anywhere. It didn't fade with the silence. If anything, it's been concentrating in the quiet, growing heavier and more present precisely because there's been no outlet for it. What you have been experiencing as an emptiness has, on their side, been a fullness they can't do anything with. They're carrying a cup that's overflowing, and they've been unable to hand it to you, and the not being able to is its own kind of agony. And this is why the title says, brace yourself. Because the real reason for their silence isn't that they feel nothing. It's that they're depleted, and they're trapped, and underneath the depletion and the trap there is an ocean of feeling for you that has been sitting there this entire time with nowhere to go. Every day you've spent believing they don't care, they have been somewhere else. Full to the brim, unable to reach you. Let me give you the practical truth here, because it's counterintuitive and it matters. We assume that strong feeling produces action, that if someone really loved us, they'd reach out. But that's simply not how the human heart works under pressure. The strongest feelings often produce paralysis, not action. because the stakes feel too high to risk getting it wrong. It's the same reason people can't find words at a funeral or freeze up in front of someone they're deeply attracted to. Big feelings don't always create movement. Sometimes they create total frozen silence precisely because they're so big. So please stop using their silence as evidence of the size of their feelings. Very often, silence is what enormous feeling looks like when it has nowhere safe to land. And notice what the Ace of Cups is not saying, because this matters and I won't oversell it. It isn't saying they've handled this well. It isn't saying their silence hasn't hurt you or that it wasn't a failure of courage on their part. It was. A person with an overflowing cup and no capacity to hand it over is still a person who left you alone with a wound. The Ace of Cups doesn't excuse that. What it does is explain it. And there's a world of difference between an explanation and an excuse. An excuse says, therefore, you shouldn't be hurt. An explanation says, your hurt is real. And here is the true cause of it, and the true cause was never that you were unloved. That's the correction this reading is making. Not don't be hurt, not they did nothing wrong, just stop believing the wrong thing about why. Because you can grieve a silence and be angry about a silence and still be completely wrong about what it meant. And it's the meaning the I wasn't enough that does the deepest damage. That's the part the Ace of Cups is here to take away from you. Next card. What's coming okay? Fifth card. And this is the future, what actually happens with this silence. The card is the Six of Swords. And I love this card here because it's the card of a slow, gentle crossing, of leaving a difficult shore behind and traveling toward calmer water. The Six of Swords tells me the silence ends. Not with a dramatic explosion, not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet, gradual crossing. This person is going to come out of the Four of Swords retreat. The depletion is going to lift. They're going to regain enough capacity to face the Eight of Swords trap. And one day, they're going to break it probably in a way that's simpler and less dramatic than you're imagining. A quiet message, a tentative reach, something small and human and a little awkward. And I want to prepare you for the shape of that crossing because if you're expecting a grand reunion, you may misread it when it comes. The Six of Swords is not fireworks. It's a small boat moving slowly across still water. So the breaking of this silence may be understated, so understated that a part of you feels disappointed, like that's it? That's what I waited for? But understand, for someone who has been underwater and paralyzed for this long, sending anything at all is an act of enormous effort. The smallness of the message is not a measure of the smallness of the feeling. It's a measure of how much strength it took to send anything at all. Here's the practical thing to hold. When someone finally emerges from a shutdown, they usually come back gently, not gloriously. They test the water. They come back at half volume. And the people who love them best are the ones who receive that half-volume return without demanding it be a symphony. So when the reach comes, and the Six of Swords says, it does try not to punish the smallness of it. Try to see it for what it is, someone who has been drowning, finally reaching the surface, using the last of their strength to say your name. Comment small boat if you're ready to receive a quiet return instead of demanding a dramatic one. Because that's how this one is going to come. And I want to be careful here because I refuse to sell you a fantasy timeline. The Six of Swords is a slow card. It's a boat crossing water, not a plane. So when I say the silence ends, I'm not telling you it ends this week. I'm telling you that the condition producing it, the depletion, the paralysis, is not permanent. Because conditions like that never are. people recover. Capacity returns. The blindfold of the Eight of Swords eventually gets pulled off, usually by nothing more dramatic than time and a slightly better week. But here's the thing I most want you to hear about that crossing. It might not be a crossing back to you. And I'd be lying if I pretended otherwise. Sometimes people surface from the Four of Swords, and the first thing they do is reach for the person they missed most. And sometimes they surface and reach for a fresh start instead, because they associate you with a version of themselves they're trying to leave behind. The Six of Swords guarantees the water gets calmer. It does not guarantee the destination. So I want you holding this reading for its truth, not its promise. The truth is, their silence was never a verdict on you. That's yours to keep, no matter which shore their boat lands on. The promise that it lands on yours is not mine to make, and anyone who makes it to you is selling something. Let's pull our final card. What this means for you, okay? Last card. After everything the story you built, what the silence actually is, why they can't break it, what they truly feel, and how it ends, let's see what this means for you. The card is Temperance. Temperance is the card of patience, of balance, of two things blending at their own pace. And it's a gentle, wise card to receive at the end of a reading like this, because it's asking something of you, but asking it kindly. Temperance is saying, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to fix this, chase it, break the silence yourself, or figure out the perfect message. And equally, you don't have to harden, write them off, decide they're a villain, or slam a door to protect yourself from a rejection that isn't even happening. Temperance is the middle path. It's holding the truth of this reading. They're depleted, they're trapped, they still feel everything with an open hand instead of a clenched one. Practically, that means keep living. Don't put your life on hold waiting for their boat to cross the water. But also, don't burn the dock down out of a hurt that was based on a story you invented. Just let it be what it is. Stay soft, stay whole, stay yourself. And let time do what time does, which is heal people and eventually give them back their capacity to reach. And Temperance has one more instruction, which is the hardest and the kindest. Stop checking. You know the checking I mean. The phone in the hand. The refreshing. The looking to see if they've been online, if they've posted, if there's any sign at all. Every time you check, you reopen the wound and you hand your emotional state to a notification that isn't coming today. Temperance is the card of the slow, steady blend, and you cannot blend anything while you keep stirring it frantically to see if it's done. Put the spoon down. The checking is not gathering information, remember? Silence contains none. The checking is just a ritual of self-harm dressed up as hope. Comment, put the spoon down if you needed to hear that today, if you've been checking a phone that has nothing to tell you. Let's see how many of us are guilty. And here's the last, most important thing I'll say to you. The gift of this reading is not they'll come back. I can't promise you the shape of what happens next, and I'd never insult you by pretending otherwise. The gift of this reading is this. You can put down the story that you weren't enough. That's the thing that's been hurting you, not the silence, the meaning you gave it. And today, the cards have taken that meaning away from you and handed you the real one instead. Their silence was never a verdict on your worth. It was a person underwater, holding an overflowing cup, unable to reach the shore. So put down the story. You were never rejected. You were never forgotten. You were, this entire time, deeply and helplessly loved by someone who simply could not lift their head above the water long enough to tell you. Before I close this, I have to answer the question that's been building in you this entire reading, because if I don't, you'll ask it the second I stop talking. So should I reach out first? And I want to give you an honest answer instead of an easy one. Because there is a version of this reading that ends with, yes, go message them, they're just struggling. And that version would be doing you a disservice. Because it turns a message of clarity into a homework assignment. Here's the honest answer. This reading is not permission, and it's not a prohibition either. What it is a correction of your information. Before today, you were making a decision based on a false premise, the premise that they don't care. Any decision built on a false premise is a bad decision, whether that decision was chase them or write them off. So the point of this reading is to hand you accurate information and then get out of the way, because you are the only one who knows the full history of this connection, what it cost you, and whether it deserves your reach. So let me give you a practical way to decide, and it's a single question. If you reached out and got nothing back, would you be okay? Not thrilled okay. Because that's the real test of whether a reach comes from your fullness or your emptiness. If you'd reach out from a settled place, out of genuine care, able to absorb silence without it destroying you, then reach, and know you did something kind. But if you'd be reaching to end your own uncertainty, to get relief, to make them tell you you still matter, then don't. Not because they're unworthy, but because you'd be handing your peace to someone who, per this whole reading, currently doesn't have the capacity to hold it. You'd be asking a drowning person to be your life raft. Sit with that question honestly. It'll give you a clearer answer than I ever could. The Seven of Swords showed us that your suffering has come from a story you constructed and then mistook for fact because silence contains no information, and you filled the blank page with your deepest fear. The Four of Swords revealed the real reason. This person isn't choosing silence. They're in silence, depleted, shut down, underwater, incapable, rather than unwilling. The Eight of Swords explained why they can't simply break it. The longer it goes, the heavier it gets, and they're trapped in a spiral where every passing day makes reaching out feel more impossible. The Ace of Cups delivered the truth underneath all of it, that the feeling never left, that it's been overflowing in the quiet with nowhere to go, that big feelings often produce paralysis rather than action. The Six of Swords promised a quiet crossing, a gentle, understated return that will take more strength than it looks like it took. And Temperance handed you the way to hold all of this. With patience, with an open hand, without hardening, and without chasing. So here's what I want you to walk away with, my loves. You have been in an argument with someone who wasn't in the room. You've been wounded by a message that was never sent. Every night you spent deciding what their silence meant about you, you were reading a blank page and swearing you saw the words. Put it down. Not because you have to wait for them, and not because you owe them anything. Put it down because you deserve to stop carrying a wound that was never actually inflicted. The real reason for their silence is not what you think. It never was. And now you know. And I'll tell you the strangest thing I learned from my own 5 weeks of building a story about a friend in a hospital I didn't know about. It wasn't relief I felt when I found out the truth. It was grief for all the time I'd spent being angry at someone who was suffering, all the nights I'd spent nursing an injury that had never happened, all the energy I'd poured into a fight with a person who wasn't fighting me. I mourned the weeks I'd lost to a story. And then I forgave myself for it, because I understood that I hadn't invented that story out of cruelty. I'd invented it out of pain, and out of the very human inability to sit in not knowing. So if that's what rises in you after this reading, not relief, but a sad, tender ache for all the days you spent believing you weren't enough. Let that ache be there. It's the sound of a story dissolving. And underneath it is the truth you get to keep. Nobody rejected you. Nobody forgot you. You were never unloved. You were simply on the other side of a silence you had no map for. And now you have one. That's the reading. If it hit you, if you felt something loosen in your chest, if you realized you've been grieving a rejection that never happened, please like this video on your way out. It genuinely helps this message reach the people sitting in a silence they've completely misread. And subscribe to Elena Tarot if you haven't, because clarifying, honest readings like this are exactly what I do. Tell me in the comments which card broke through for you. The story you built? The trap they're in? The overflowing cup? I read every single one. And if you know exactly whose silence this is about, you don't have to name them. Just drop one, so I know you finally understand what it really meant. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for having a heart soft enough to be hurt by a silence, because only the ones who love deeply can be wounded by an absence. That softness isn't your weakness. Don't let a misread silence convince you otherwise. Put down the story. I'll see you in the next one.